The night James vanished, I felt the room grow cold in a way I had never experienced before, not in all my years of calling to the dead. It was the kind of cold that reaches past your skin and settles in your bones, the kind that whispers of something fundamentally wrong in the order of things. I should have known then that everything we had built together, every stolen moment in gaslit corridors, and every whispered promise in the shadows of drawing rooms, was about to shatter like frost on morning glass. But I was too focused on the circle of hands around the table, too absorbed in the familiar ritual of opening myself to the voices that lingered between this world and the next, to recognize the warning for what it was. The séance was held at Lady Pemberton's townhouse in Belgravia, in a room she kept permanently draped in heavy velvet curtains the color of dried blood. 16 candles flickered on the mantelpiece, casting restless shadows across the faces of the 6 people seated around the mahogany table. Lady Pemberton herself sat directly across from me, her widow's weeds rustling with every breath, her eyes hungry for some word from her late husband. To my left was Mrs. Dalton, a wealthy merchant's wife who attended every spiritualist gathering in London with the dedication of the devoutly faithful. To my right sat Colonel Bradshaw, a skeptic whose presence always made my work harder, his disbelief like a wall I had to push through to reach the other side. And beside him, trying to appear casually interested but watching me with those dark, intelligent eyes that saw far too much, was James. Dr. James Ashford had first come to one of my public circles 6 months earlier, introduced by a mutual acquaintance who knew nothing of his true purpose. He was there to expose me, to prove that I was nothing more than a clever actress preying on the grief of the bereaved. He had read too many accounts of fraudulent mediums, studied too many tricks of the trade, armed himself with too much scientific certainty about the impossibility of communion with the dead. He expected to find cold reading, hidden accomplices, phosphorescent paint, and all the usual deceptions. What he found instead unsettled him in ways he could not explain away. I had not needed to read him, to study the cut of his coat or the calluses on his hands or the way he held his shoulders. The moment he entered the room, I felt his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure, and I knew things about him that had nothing to do with observation. I knew about the sister he had lost to scarlet fever when he was 12. I knew about the guilt he carried for being unable to save her despite all his medical training that came later. I knew about the way he still heard her voice sometimes in his dreams, calling his name in that particular way she had, half plea and half song. When her spirit came through during that first séance, speaking through me in a child's voice about the music box with the broken ballerina and the secret she had kept about stealing Mother's pearl earring, James went white as paper. After the circle broke, he waited until the others had gone and confronted me in the hallway, his hands shaking slightly as he demanded to know how I had obtained such private information. I told him the truth. I told him I had not obtained it at all. I told him his sister had been standing beside him the entire evening, her hand resting on his shoulder, and she wanted him to know that she forgave him for not being there when she died, that she had never blamed him, that she had been calling to him all these years and was so relieved he had finally come to a place where he might hear her. He left without another word, but I knew he would return. They always did, the ones who received genuine messages. Skepticism was easier to maintain at a distance. He came back 2 weeks later, and then again the week after that. He began to ask questions, to test me, to bring objects belonging to the deceased and see if I could sense their histories. I passed every test, not through cleverness, but through the simple truth that I could see and hear things he could not. The scientific part of his mind struggled against this reality, tried to find rational explanations, searched for the trick he was certain must exist. But the part of him that still grieved his sister, that still longed for some proof that death was not the absolute end of consciousness and love, began to open like a door long locked. And somewhere in those weeks of testing and questioning, somewhere between his skepticism and my patience, between his need to understand and my inability to fully explain, we fell in love. It was a love that could not be spoken of openly, I was a spiritualist medium, a woman who made her living in the borderlands between science and faith, respected by some and reviled by others. He was a physician with a growing reputation, a man of science who could not afford to be associated too closely with the world of seances and spirits without risking his professional standing. We met in secret, in the quiet hours after my public circles, in the anonymous darkness of hansom cabs traveling through fog-bound streets, in rented rooms where no one knew our names. He would hold me as if I were something precious and fragile, as if his skepticism and my certainty might somehow balance each other into something sustainable. He never fully believed, not in the way Lady Pemberton or Mrs. Dalton believed. He wanted to, desperately, but his training would not allow it. Instead, he developed theories, tried to explain my abilities through mesmerism or heightened sensitivity to unconscious cues or some undiscovered property of human consciousness. I did not mind his theories. I understood that this was how he made sense of something that defied the orderly universe he had been taught to trust. And in private, when it was only the two of us and the walls he built around his heart came down, he would whisper that whatever I was, whatever this gift or curse might be, he loved me for it, and in spite of it, and because of it all at once. But that night in Lady Pemberton's drawing room, something changed. The séance began as they always did. I led the group through the familiar ritual, asking them to clear their minds and open their hearts, to join hands and create a circle of energy that might serve as a beacon for the departed. I closed my eyes and let myself slip into that strange state between waking and dreaming, that place where the veil grew thin and the dead could press close enough to touch. At first, there was nothing unusual. I felt the familiar presence of Lady Pemberton's husband, his energy anxious and apologetic, eager to assure his wife that the debts he had left behind were not as dire as she feared. I relayed his messages, his pet names for her, the specific location where he had hidden a small cache of bonds she did not know existed. She wept with relief and gratitude. Then Mrs. Dalton's mother came through, and then Colonel Bradshaw's brother who had died in India, and I served as the bridge between their grief and their beloveds, as I had done countless times before. But as I prepared to close the circle, to thank the spirits for their presence and gently send them back beyond the veil, the temperature in the room plummeted. The candles guttered and dimmed. Someone gasped. I felt a pressure building in my chest, a heaviness that made it difficult to breathe. This was not the gentle presence of the ordinary dead, the ones who lingered close to earth out of love or unfinished business. This was something else, something that pushed through the veil with force rather than invitation. I tried to close the circle, to speak the words that would seal the doorway I had opened, but my voice caught in my throat. The pressure increased. I heard James say my name, his tone sharp with concern, felt his hand tighten around mine. And then I felt it, the presence that had been pushing through, and it was vast and cold and angry in a way that made my blood turn to ice. The voice that came from my lips was not my own. It was deeper, masculine, resonant with rage. The words spilled out before I could stop them, before I could understand what was happening. "Get out," it said through me, "all of you. Leave her. She is not what she seems." The room erupted in confusion. Hands broke apart. Someone screamed. I felt myself swaying, felt James's arm around my shoulders, heard him ordering everyone to stay calm. The presence released me as suddenly as it had seized me, and I gasped for air like someone drowning. When I opened my eyes, everyone was staring at me with expressions ranging from fear to fascination. Everyone except James. He was looking toward the door, his face drained of color, his body rigid with tension. Lady Pemberton demanded to know what spirit had interrupted her circle. Mrs. Dalton was praying under her breath. Colonel Bradshaw looked vindicated, as if this disruption confirmed every suspicion he had ever harbored about the dangers of meddling with the dead. I could not answer them. I was still shaking, still feeling the echo of that presence in my bones. I had been a medium for 8 years, since the gift first manifested when I was 17, and I had never experienced anything like that intrusion, that forceful takeover of my voice and body. James helped me to my feet. He made my excuses to Lady Pemberton, his physician's authority lending weight to his insistence that I needed rest and quiet. He guided me out of the drawing room and down the corridor to a small sitting room where he had me sit in a wingback chair while he poured brandy from a decanter on the sideboard. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside the chair and studying my face with professional concern. "Did it harm you in any way?" I shook my head, though I was not entirely certain that was true. I felt bruised somewhere deeper than flesh, as if something had reached inside me and left marks on my very essence. "James, what was that? I have never felt anything like it." He handed me the brandy, and I noticed his hand was trembling slightly. "Neither have I," he said quietly. "Eleanor, I think we should stop. No more seances, not until we understand what just happened." I wanted to agree with him. I wanted to tell him that I was frightened, that I did not want to open myself to the spirit world again until I understood what had come through and why. But seances were my livelihood, my purpose. I could not simply stop because one evening had ended badly. "I will be more careful," I told him. "I will strengthen my protections, perhaps consult with some of the other mediums in the city." He looked as if he wanted to argue, but he knew better than to try to talk me out of something once my mind was made up. Instead, he pressed a kiss to my forehead and told me he would see me tomorrow, that I should go home and rest. I did not want him to leave. I wanted him to stay with me, to hold me until the trembling stopped and the memory of that cold, angry presence faded. But we were still in Lady Pemberton's house, still surrounded by people who might notice, might whisper, might ruin both our reputations with a careless word. So I let him go. I gathered my things and called for a hansom cab. On the journey back to my lodgings in Bloomsbury, I sat in the darkness and tried to make sense of what had happened. The voice that had spoken through me had been warning the others away, had called me false. But why? I was not a fraud. My gift was genuine, unless the presence had not been warning them about deception, but about danger. Unless it had been trying to protect them from something. From what, though? From me? From something I had inadvertently called through? From some threat I did not yet recognize? The cab rattled through the fog-bound streets, and I pressed my hand against the window, feeling the cold glass beneath my palm. Somewhere out there in the London night, James was making his own way home, probably still analyzing what had occurred with that methodical medical mind of his, trying to fit the inexplicable into some framework of reason. I did not know then that it would be the last time I saw him for 23 days. I did not know that the next morning, when I sent a note to his lodgings asking if we might meet, his landlady would tell my messenger that Dr. Ashford had not returned home the previous night. I did not know that by evening, when I went to his lodgings myself, frantic with worry, she would inform me that his bed had not been slept in, his medical bag was missing, and no one had seen him since he left for Lady Pemberton's séance. I did not know that the police would question me, suspicion clear in their eyes, asking me to account for his movements after he left the townhouse. I did not know that his colleagues would search the hospitals and morgues, that his friends would post notices and offer rewards, that his family would travel down from Yorkshire and look at me with cold accusation, as if they sensed that somehow his association with me had led to his disappearance. I did not know that I would spend the next 3 weeks haunted by his absence, by the terrible certainty that something I had done, some door I had opened, had swallowed him whole. All I knew that night, as the cab delivered me to my door and I climbed the stairs to my rooms, was that I had felt something malevolent and powerful, and that it had taken notice of me. I locked my door and lit every lamp I owned, trying to push back the darkness. But the cold remained, settled deep in my chest where no fire could reach it, and I knew with a dreadful certainty that whatever had come through during that séance was not finished with me yet. It was only beginning. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of my life, each day stretching into an eternity of unanswered questions and sleepless nights. I canceled all my scheduled seances, claiming illness, which was not entirely untrue. I could not bring myself to open that doorway again, not when I did not understand what had come through or where James had gone. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that cold presence pressing against me, heard that angry voice speaking through my lips. "Get out, leave her. She is not what she seems." The police came to interview me twice. The first time, they were merely gathering information, asking routine questions about when I had last seen Dr. Ashford and whether he had seemed troubled or distressed. I told them the truth as far as I could without revealing the nature of our relationship. I said he had attended a séance at Lady Pemberton's house, that he had seemed well, that I had left before him and did not know where he had gone afterward. The second time they came, 3 days later, their questions were sharper, more pointed. A Detective Inspector Whitmore led the interview, a man with iron-gray hair and eyes like flint who clearly had no patience for spiritualists or mediums. He wanted to know the precise nature of my relationship with Dr. Ashford. He wanted to know if we had argued that evening. He wanted to know if I had any reason to wish the doctor harm. I understood what he was implying. A woman involved with a man who then vanishes is always a suspect, especially a woman like me, who trafficked in mysteries and claimed powers that respectable people found unsettling. I could see the judgment in his eyes, the certainty that I was some kind of charlatan who had somehow ensnared a decent man and then disposed of him when he threatened to expose me. I maintained my composure and answered his questions carefully. No, we had not argued. No, I had no reason to wish him harm. Yes, I had feelings of friendship and professional respect for him. No, I did not know where he was or what might have happened to him. When Detective Inspector Whitmore finally left, I sat alone in my parlor and wept for the first time since James had vanished. I wept for him, wherever he was, and I wept for myself, for the position I found myself in, unable to mourn openly, or even admit the depth of my loss without inviting scandal and further suspicion. My friend Margaret came to visit me during the second week. She was one of the few people who knew the truth about James and me, a fellow medium who had trained me when I was first coming into my gift. She was older than I by 15 years, a widow who had turned to spiritualism after her husband's death and discovered she had genuine abilities. She had become something of a mentor to me, teaching me how to protect myself during seances, how to distinguish between true spirits and mere echoes or impositions, how to navigate the social complexities of being a woman who claimed to speak with the dead. She sat with me in my parlor, her kind face creased with concern, and listened as I told her everything that had happened during that final seance. I described the cold that had descended, the force of the presence that had seized control of me, the warning it had spoken through my lips. Margaret was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "Eleanor, I want you to consider the possibility that what came through was not a spirit at all." I stared at her, not understanding. What else could it have been? "There are entities that exist in the spaces between worlds," she said carefully. "Things that are neither living nor dead in the way we understand those terms. They are drawn to mediums because we create doorways, because our gifts make us visible to them in ways ordinary people are not. Most of the time, our protections keep them at bay. But sometimes, if we are distracted or weakened, or if we open ourselves too fully, they can slip through." "You think something like that took James," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I think something took notice of you. And James was close enough to you to become caught in its attention." Margaret reached across and took my hand. "These entities feed on strong emotion, on love and grief and fear. Your connection to James would have been like a beacon to it." The thought made me sick. If what she was saying was true, then my love for James, the very thing that had brought joy and meaning into my life, had marked him as a target for something dark and hungry. "What do I do?" I asked. "How do I find him? How do I fight something like that?" Margaret's expression was grave. "You do not fight it, Eleanor. You protect yourself and you wait. These entities rarely hold their prey for long. They consume what they need and then they release what remains. If James is still himself, if he is still alive in any meaningful sense, he will return when it is finished with him." The words should have brought me comfort, but instead they filled me with horror. What would be left of James when this thing was finished with him? Would he even be the man I loved? Or would he return changed, damaged, hollowed out by whatever had taken him? I wanted to rage against Margaret's advice, to insist that there must be something I could do, some way to reach into that darkness and pull James back. But I knew she was right. I had felt the power of that presence. Going after it directly would be like throwing myself into a furnace and expecting to emerge unburned. So I waited. I waited through days that dragged like years, through nights when I lay awake listening to every creak and whisper in my lodgings, wondering if each sound might be James returning or that cold presence coming back for me. I waited through interviews with police and questions from reporters who had somehow learned of my connection to the missing physician. I waited through the pitying looks from my landlady and the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Lady Pemberton sent me a note saying that she hoped I was recovering from my illness, but that she thought it best if I did not conduct any more seances at her home. Mrs. Dalton visited once, ostensibly to check on my health, but really to ask in a roundabout way whether the events of that evening had any connection to Dr. Ashford's disappearance. Even Colonel Bradshaw wrote to me, a surprisingly kind letter expressing concern and offering his assistance if I needed anything, though I suspected his motives were not entirely pure. James's family came to London during the third week. His mother was a stern woman in deep mourning clothes, her face lined with grief and anger. She blamed me, though she never said so directly. She did not need to. I could see it in her eyes when she looked at me, could hear it in the careful way she spoke around the accusation. Her son had been a respectable physician with a promising future until he became involved with spiritualism, until he met me. Now he was gone, and in her mind, I was responsible. I could not defend myself without revealing the depth of our relationship, which would only confirm her worst suspicions and destroy what remained of James's reputation. So I accepted her cold courtesy and her veiled accusations, and I felt each word like a knife between my ribs. By the time the third week ended, I had begun to lose hope. Margaret's assurance that James would return felt like a false comfort, a story told to keep me from descending into despair. The police had stopped coming to interview me, which I took to mean they had either found evidence that cleared me or simply moved on to other theories. The newspapers had begun to lose interest, moving on to fresher scandals and tragedies. London continued on as it always did, indifferent to my suffering, and I was left alone with my grief and guilt and the terrible question of what I had done wrong during that séance, what protection I had failed to maintain, what door I had left open that should have been sealed. I began to consider leaving London entirely, starting over somewhere else where no one knew me or knew about James. I could take a new name, claim to be a widow, perhaps, and try to rebuild some semblance of a life. But the thought of abandoning the city while James was still missing, while there was still even the smallest possibility that he might return, felt like a betrayal I could not commit. So I remained, trapped in a kind of limbo, neither moving forward nor able to go back. It was on a Thursday morning, exactly 23 days after James had vanished, that I received a note from Lady Ashworth, a wealthy widow who had attended several of my public circles in the past. She wished to engage me for a private séance, she wrote, to contact her late husband who had died 2 years earlier. She had heard I had been ill, but hoped I had recovered sufficiently to assist her with this matter, which she described as urgent. My first instinct was to decline. I had not conducted a séance since that terrible evening, and the thought of opening myself to the spirit world again filled me with dread. But I needed the income. My savings were nearly depleted, and my landlady had begun to make pointed comments about the rent. More than that, I needed to prove to myself that I could still do this work, that one bad experience had not stripped me of my gift or my courage. If I allowed fear to keep me from using my abilities, then whatever had come through that night had already won. I sent a note back accepting Lady Ashworth's invitation. The séance was scheduled for the following evening at her home in Mayfair, a grand house on Grosvenor Square with high ceilings and too many mirrors. She received me in a drawing room decorated in the aesthetic style, all peacock feathers and Japanese screens and furniture that looked more like art than anything meant for actual use. Lady Ashworth herself was a handsome woman in her middle 40s, dressed in half-mourning, the prescribed grays and lavenders of someone who had completed the full year of deep mourning but still wished to acknowledge her loss. She greeted me warmly, asked after my health, and offered refreshments that I politely declined. There would be 4 of us for the circle, she explained. Herself, her sister Mrs. Blackwood, a friend named Miss Telford, and me. A small group, intimate, which she hoped would make the connection stronger. As I set up for the séance, arranging candles and preparing the room, I felt the old familiar anticipation mixed with a new undercurrent of fear. I had strengthened my protections, had spent the previous night in meditation and prayer, asking for guidance and shielding from any malevolent forces. I had worn my mother's silver cross, though I was never quite sure if such talismans actually helped or merely provided psychological comfort. The 3 women joined hands with me around a small round table. I led them through the opening ritual, feeling my way carefully into that in-between state, testing the veil before I pushed through it. Everything felt normal at first. The familiar softness of the boundary between worlds, the gentle presences of ordinary spirits lingering nearby, curious but not aggressive. I felt Lady Ashworth's husband almost immediately, his energy patient and loving, eager to reassure his wife. I began to relay his messages, his memories of their life together, his gratitude for her continued devotion to his memory. And then the temperature dropped. My eyes flew open. No, I thought desperately, not again, not here. But it was already too late. I felt the presence pushing through, that same cold, angry force that had invaded me before. I tried to close the circle, to seal the doorway, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness, except for the dim gaslight from the hallway. Someone screamed. I felt hands release mine as the women broke the circle in panic. And then I felt something different. Something I had not experienced during the first intrusion. The presence did not just speak through me this time. It shaped itself, condensed itself, became something almost visible in the darkness of the room. When the gaslight flickered back to life, strengthened by someone in the hallway, I saw him. James stood in the doorway, his clothes disheveled, his face pale as death, his eyes reflecting the light with an unnatural gleam. For one heartbreaking moment, I thought he had simply returned, that Margaret had been right and whatever had taken him had finally released him. Relief flooded through me so intensely that I felt dizzy with it. But then he spoke, and I knew with horrible certainty that this was not my James, not truly. His voice was his own, but wrong somehow, deeper and hollow, as if something else was speaking through him the way that presence had spoken through me. "Eleanor Hartwell," he said, and the way he spoke my name made my blood freeze. "You have called me here to speak, so I shall speak. I shall tell these witnesses what you have done." Lady Ashworth and her companions stared at him in shock and confusion. I tried to stand, tried to go to him, but my legs would not support me. "James," I whispered. "James, is that truly you?" He smiled. But it was not his smile. It was cold and cruel and triumphant. "I am what remains of James Ashford," he said. "I am what she made of me with her dark gifts and her hunger for power. She called to me in secret, drew me into her web, and when I discovered what she truly was, she silenced me. She murdered me, and now I have returned from beyond the veil to name her for what she is. Murderess, deceiver, witch. The room exploded into chaos. Lady Ashworth screamed. Mrs. Blackwood fainted. Miss Telford ran for the door, nearly colliding with James, or the thing wearing James's body, in her panic to escape. I sat frozen, unable to move or speak, staring at the man I loved as he accused me of killing him, as he named me murderess before witnesses, as he destroyed everything with words I knew were lies but could not disprove. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away down the hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, leaving behind nothing but chaos and the smoking ruin of my reputation. I did not remember leaving Lady Ashworth's house. I did not remember the cab ride home or climbing the stairs to my lodgings. The next clear memory I had was of sitting on the floor of my parlor, still wearing my cloak, staring at nothing and trying to understand what had just happened. James was alive. James had returned, but not as himself, as something else, something that wore his face and spoke with his voice, but carried a malevolence that was utterly foreign to the man I knew, and he had accused me of murder. By morning, I knew, the story would be all over London. The witnesses would tell everyone they knew. The newspapers would print it. The police would come for me again, this time with arrest warrants. James's family would demand justice. I would be tried and convicted in the court of public opinion long before any legal proceedings began, and my only defense, the truth that I loved him and would never harm him, would sound like the desperate plea of a guilty woman. I should have fled that night. I should have packed what I could carry and disappeared into the vast anonymity of the city. Perhaps found passage on a ship to America or the continent where no one knew my name or face. But I could not leave, because somewhere in London, James was walking around in his own body, possessed by something that hated me enough to destroy me, and I had to find him. I had to reach whatever part of him remained and fight for his soul, even if it cost me everything else. The candles had burned down to stubs. The room was growing cold again, and somewhere in the darkness, I could feel that presence watching me, waiting to see what I would do next. I wrapped my arms around myself and began to plan, because surrender had never been in my nature, and I would not start now, not even in the face of the impossible. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my small writing desk with Lavinia's journal open before me, reading by lamplight until my eyes burned and the words began to blur together. The journal was a catalogue of horrors, filled with accounts of mediums who had encountered the Hollow Ones and paid terrible prices for their ignorance. Some had lost their minds, unable to distinguish between the living and the entities that wore human faces. Others had lost people they loved, watching helplessly as something inhuman used a beloved body like a puppet. A few had lost their own souls, their consciousness displaced, while a Hollow One took residence in their flesh. But scattered among the warnings were also methods of protection and detection. Lavinia had compiled tests, small ways to determine whether the person before you was truly human or something else. The Hollow Ones could access memories and mimic mannerisms, but there were limits to their understanding of human emotion. They struggled with genuine spontaneity, with the small inconsistencies that made people real. They could not always maintain their disguise under emotional pressure, or when confronted with deeply personal truths they had no context to understand. There were also rituals of binding and banishment, complex ceremonies involving salt circles and iron implements and words in languages I did not recognize. But these required preparation and power, and I was not certain I possessed either in sufficient measure. As dawn broke over London, painting my window with weak gray light, I had formulated a plan. It was imperfect and dangerous, but it was all I had. When James came to me today, if it was James, I would test him. I would ask him questions only the real James would know how to answer. Things too subtle or personal for a creature rifling through stolen memories to fabricate convincingly. And if I discovered that what stood before me was not my James, but a Hollow One wearing his skin, Then I would find a way to banish it and reclaim the man I loved, or die trying. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple day dress of deep gray that would not show stains should things go badly. I pinned my hair severely back and studied my reflection in the mirror. I looked pale and drawn, my eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and fear. But beneath the exhaustion, I saw something else: determination, strength I had not known I possessed. I would not lose him. I would not let some parasitic entity steal the man who had taught me that love could exist alongside doubt, that skepticism and faith could coexist in the same heart, that two people from different worlds could find a way to meet in the spaces between. The knock came at 10:30 in the morning. Mrs. Brennan called up the stairs that I had a visitor, her tone bright with the kind of curiosity that comes from seeing a young woman receive a gentleman caller. I took a steadying breath, slipped Lavinia's journal into the drawer of my writing desk, and went downstairs to face whatever waited for me. He stood in the front parlor that Mrs. Brennan kept for visitors, backlit by the window so that I could not immediately see his face. But I knew the shape of him, the way he held his shoulders, the particular angle of his head. My heart lurched with desperate hope, even as my mind whispered warnings. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was James's voice, warm and familiar and edged with concern. "Thank God you are all right. I have been so worried." He moved toward me, and the light from the window fell across his face. It was James's face, every detail exactly as I remembered. The dark eyes that held intelligence and kindness in equal measure. The strong jaw with the small scar near his left ear where he had fallen as a child. The mouth I had kissed in secret, in darkness, in moments stolen from the world's judgment. But something was wrong. I could not name it precisely, could not point to any specific feature that was out of place. But something in the way he looked at me felt off, like a painting copied by a skilled artist who had nevertheless failed to capture some essential quality of the original. "James," I said carefully, remaining near the door. "Where have you been? Everyone has been searching for you. The police came to question me. Your family thinks you are dead." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so characteristic of him that I almost let my guard down. "I do not know how to explain it," he said. "I left Lady Pemberton's house that night, and I cannot remember what happened after that. I woke up this morning in a rented room in Whitechapel, with no memory of how I got there or what I have been doing for the past 3 weeks. My medical bag was beside me, unopened. My pockets contained money I do not remember having. And I had this overwhelming need to find you, to make certain you were safe." His story was plausible. Head injuries could cause memory loss. Perhaps he had been attacked and robbed, left confused and wandering. Perhaps he had been ill, delirious with fever, and only now regained his senses. These were the things I wanted to believe, the explanations that would allow me to run to him and hold him and weep with relief that he had returned. But Lavinia's warnings held me back. "You do not remember anything from the past 3 weeks?" I asked, watching his face carefully. "Not where you went, or who you spoke to, or what you did?" "Nothing," he said, and he looked genuinely distressed by this admission. "It is as if those weeks simply did not exist for me. Eleanor, I am frightened. This is not a symptom of any medical condition I know. I have examined myself and found no evidence of head trauma or illness. It is as if I simply ceased to exist for 23 days and then woke up again with no explanation." I moved further into the room, but kept the settee between us, using it as a barrier. "The police will want to speak with you," I said. "They will have questions about where you have been." "I know," he said. "I will go to them after I leave here, but I needed to see you first." That night at Lady Pemberton's, when that presence came through during the séance, when it spoke through you, I felt something shift in the room. I felt as though something had noticed me, marked me somehow. And then everything went dark, and I remember nothing more until this morning. Eleanor, I think what happened to me is connected to your work, to the spirits you commune with. I think something from the other side has done this to me. It was exactly the kind of thing the real James would say. He had always believed that my abilities were genuine, even when he struggled to accept the implications. He had always approached the spirit world with a mixture of scientific curiosity and cautious respect. But something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, as if he were reciting lines he had memorized rather than expressing genuine confusion and fear. I decided to test him. "Do you remember the first time you came to one of my circles?" I asked. "Do you remember what your sister told you through me?" He smiled, and it was James's smile, gentle and a little sad. She told me about the music box with the broken ballerina. She told me she forgave me for not being there when she died. She said she had been calling to me for years, waiting for me to finally hear her. It was the correct answer. The same answer he had given when I asked him about it months ago. But it was also an answer that could be gleaned from his memories, from things he might have told others, or written in letters, or simply thought about in quiet moments. A hollow one, with access to his mind, could reproduce this information perfectly. I needed something more subtle, something that could not be extracted from memory alone, because it had never been fully articulated between us. "Do you remember what you said to me the night we first kissed?" I asked, my voice soft. "Do you remember the words you used?" He hesitated, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or calculation. "We were in a hansom cab," he said, slowly. "It was raining. You had just finished a particularly difficult séance, and you were exhausted. I told you that I loved you, that I had been fighting it for weeks, but could not deny it any longer." "Wrong," I said quietly. "You did not tell me you loved me that night. You told me you were terrified of me and drawn to me in equal measure. That you could not reconcile your need to understand me with your need to simply accept me as I was. You said you felt as though you were standing at the edge of a cliff, and I was the wind that might push you over or carry you safely across. You did not say you loved me until 3 weeks later, after the séance where your sister came through a second time and told you that she approved of me." The man wearing James's face went very still. His expression did not change, but something in the quality of his stillness felt wrong, felt like a predator that had been discovered and was deciding whether to flee or attack. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "I am certain I told you I loved you that first night. Perhaps you are misremembering." "No," I said, and I felt power rising in me, the same power I used when I opened myself to the spirit world, but focused now on this single purpose. "No, James would never say I was misremembering. He always trusted my recall better than his own. He used to joke that I had a mind like a steel trap, while his was more like a sieve. He would say perhaps he was confused, or perhaps he had spoken the words in his mind but not aloud. But he would never accuse me of misremembering something so important." The thing in James's body took a step toward me, and I saw its face shift just slightly, the mask of humanity slipping for a fraction of a second. I saw something ancient and hungry beneath, something that looked at me the way a collector might look at a rare specimen. "Clever," it said, and James's voice had taken on a quality that made my skin crawl. "Lavinia warned you well. I should have expected as much. She has always been troublesome, teaching her little mediums to recognize us." I backed toward the door, my hand fumbling behind me for the handle. "Where is he? Where is James?" The creature smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see James's smile twisted into something cold and amused. "He is safe, for now. He exists in a place between waking and sleeping, dreaming dreams that feel real enough to keep him content. He does not know that I have taken his place. He does not know that his body walks and talks and lives without him. And if you do not cooperate with me, Eleanor Hartwell, he never will." "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Lavinia's journal. "You wanted to experience life again. You wanted a body. You have one now. Why do you need me?" Because the connection is not stable, it said, moving closer despite my retreat. I can wear him for a time, but without the anchor that brought me through, I will eventually be pulled back beyond the veil. You open the door for me, Eleanor. You are the medium, the bridge, the one who stands with one foot in the world of the living and one in the realm of the dead. I need you to help me stay here, to strengthen the bond that allows me to keep this flesh. Never, I said. I will never help you. Then he will remain trapped in the space between, existing but not living, dreaming but never waking. Is that what you want for your beloved James? An eternity of half-existence while I enjoy the life he built, the career he cultivated, the love he was foolish enough to feel for a woman who traffics with the dead. I felt tears burning in my eyes, fury and desperation warring in my chest. Give him back. Leave his body and return to whatever hell you crawled from. The creature laughed, and it was a sound so wrong coming from James's mouth that I wanted to cover my ears. I will make you an offer, Eleanor. You have power more than you realize. You could open doors that would allow others like me to cross over, to experience the warmth and sensation and vitality of human existence. Do this for me. Provide me with companions, and I will give you James back. Not right away, of course. I have only just begun to enjoy this body. But eventually, when I have had my fill of living, I will release him. He will wake as if from a long sleep, confused but unharmed. You are lying, I said. Lavinia told me that the hollow ones are liars. Perhaps, it said, still smiling. But can you afford to gamble with his soul? Can you live with yourself if you refuse me and condemn him to eternal imprisonment in the space between worlds? Mrs. Brennan's voice called from somewhere in the house, asking if I needed anything, if my visitor would be staying for tea. The creature wearing James's body glanced toward the sound, momentarily distracted, and I saw my chance. I am a medium, I had told Inspector Davies. The dead call to me. But I was more than just a receiver of spirits. I was a doorway, yes, but a doorway could be opened from either side, could be used to expel as well as to invite. I had never tried it before, had never had reason to force a spirit out rather than welcome it in, but Lavinia's journal had contained instructions, and I had memorized them in the desperate hours before dawn. I planted my feet and reached for the power that lived in the deepest part of me, the part that could sense the veil and move through it like a swimmer moving through water. I reached for the thread that connected me to the spirit world, and I pulled. Get out of him, I commanded, and my voice was not my own voice, but something larger, something that resonated with authority I had not known I possessed. You have no right to his flesh. You have no claim to his life. I opened the door and I can close it. Get out. The creature staggered, its face contorting with pain or rage or both. It tried to speak, but I pulled harder, focusing all my will on severing the connection between the hollow one and James's body, on forcing the intruder back across the veil. For a moment, I thought I had succeeded. The creature's eyes rolled back, and James's body began to collapse. But then something pushed back, hard, and I felt a presence in my mind, cold and invasive, trying to burrow into my thoughts. You cannot banish me alone, the creature hissed, and now its voice was layered. James's voice overlaid with something older and more terrible. You are strong, little medium, but not strong enough. And if you continue to fight me, I will hurt him in ways you cannot imagine. I will trap him in nightmares of my making. I will show him things that will shatter his mind. Give up, Eleanor. Let me have this life, and I promise he will not suffer. I felt my strength wavering, felt the creature's presence pushing against my mental defenses. It was right. I was not strong enough to banish it alone. I needed help, needed other mediums to form a circle, needed time and preparation and resources I did not have. But I could do one thing. I could mark it. I could make certain that when I found a way to fight back, I would be able to recognize this specific creature, to track it even if it tried to hide. With the last of my strength, I reached past the creature's defenses and touched the essence of James that remained buried beneath the invader's presence. I found the small spark of his consciousness, the fragment of his soul that the Hollow One had not been able to fully suppress, and I marked it with my own energy, with a piece of my own spirit woven into his. It was an act of desperation and love, a way of saying, I will find you, I will not abandon you, I will bring you home. The creature felt what I had done and howled with rage. It threw me back, and I hit the wall hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. When I looked up, gasping, James's body was already moving toward the door. This is not over, the creature said, straightening James's coat with hands that trembled slightly. You have made an enemy today, Eleanor Hartwell. I will wear him until you agree to help me, and every day that passes, every moment I spend in his flesh, his true self fades a little more. Eventually, there will be nothing left of him to save. Think about that the next time you consider defying me. It walked out, leaving me crumpled against the wall, my head throbbing and my heart breaking. Mrs. Brennan rushed in moments later, finding me there and fussing over me with maternal concern, asking what had happened. Had I fallen? Should she send for a doctor? I told her I had felt faint, that I had been working too hard, that I simply needed rest. She helped me upstairs to my rooms and brought me tea I did not drink. When she finally left me alone, I locked my door and collapsed onto my bed, shaking with reaction and fury and helpless grief. James was trapped inside his own body, prisoner to a creature that wore him like a costume, and I had failed to free him. I had not been strong enough, had not known enough, had not prepared well enough, but I had marked him. I had bound a piece of myself to the piece of him that remained, and that meant I could find him, could track him, could sense where the creature took him. It also meant something else, something Lavinia's journal had mentioned only briefly in one of its darker passages. When two souls were bound together, when a medium tied her own essence to another person's, it created a connection that transcended death and distance. It also created a vulnerability. If one soul was damaged or destroyed, the other would feel it, would carry the wound like a scar across their own spirit. I had just bound myself to James in a way that could save him or destroy us both. I lay in my bed as afternoon faded to evening, as the room grew dark and cold around me, and I made plans. I would go back to Lavinia. I would learn everything she could teach me about the Hollow Ones. I would find other mediums willing to help, would form a circle strong enough to tear that creature from James's body and cast it back beyond the veil. And if that failed, if there was no way to save him through conventional means, then I would find an unconventional way. Because I had not spent months falling in love with James Ashford, had not given him pieces of my heart and soul, had not learned to see the world through the lens of our combined faith and skepticism, only to lose him to something that treated human life as a commodity to be stolen. I would save him, or I would die trying. And if the Hollow One thought it had won by walking out of here in James's body, it had gravely underestimated what a woman in love was capable of when pushed beyond the limits of fear and into the realm of absolute determination. I returned to Lavinia's townhouse the following morning, this time without hesitation or ceremony. Her butler recognized me and showed me directly to her private study, a room I had not seen on my first visit. It was smaller than the sitting room, lined floor to ceiling with books and artifacts that spoke of a lifetime spent studying the occult. Crystals and iron implements hung from the walls alongside framed photographs of people I did not recognize, their faces solemn and knowing. Lavinia was seated at a desk covered in papers and open books, a pair of reading spectacles perched on her nose. She looked up as I entered and removed the spectacles with a sigh that suggested she had been expecting me. "He came to you," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said, closing the door behind me. And I tried to banish it, but I was not strong enough. Lavinia, I need your help. I need to learn how to fight this thing before it destroys what remains of James. She gestured to a chair, and I sat, my body still aching from where I had hit the wall. Did you test it as I instructed? I did. It could access his memories, but it could not replicate the subtle emotional truths between us. When I challenged it, it revealed itself. And what did it want from you? It wants me to help it stay in his body permanently. It wants me to open doors for others like it, to provide it with companions. In exchange, it promised to eventually release James. Lavinia made a sound of disgust. They always promise release. They never deliver. The longer a hollow one inhabits a body, the more it consumes the original soul. Eventually, there is nothing left to release. The person you love simply ceases to exist, worn away like a stone under running water. I felt my throat tighten with fear, but I pushed it down. You said it was not too late. You said I could fight for him. I said you could try, Lavinia corrected. There is a difference. But yes, with the right preparation and the right allies, you have a chance. Tell me, did you mark him before the creature left? I nodded. I bound a piece of my own essence to the piece of James that remains. I can feel him now, like a distant heartbeat. I know where he is. Lavinia closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, her expression was grave. That was brave and foolish in equal measure, Eleanor. You have created a connection that will allow you to track him, yes, but you have also made yourself vulnerable. If the Hollow One discovers what you have done, it can use that bond to hurt you, to invade your mind, to pull you into the space where it has imprisoned James's consciousness. You have essentially given it a weapon to use against you. I do not care, I said. I need to be able to find him. I need to know he is still there, still fighting. Lavinia studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. If you are committed to this course, then we must move quickly. The Hollow One will not remain passive now that it knows you can recognize it. It will either try to eliminate you as a threat or convince you to cooperate. Either way, we have limited time. I can help you, but I cannot do this alone. We will need at least 3 other mediums, powerful ones, who can hold a circle strong enough to tear that creature from its stolen flesh. Do you know such mediums? I asked. Will they help? I know several who might, for the right reasons and the right price. But Eleanor, you must understand what you are asking of them. Fighting a Hollow One is dangerous. Some of those who have tried have lost their own souls in the process, have been pulled beyond the veil and trapped there while the creature they were fighting escaped into their bodies. Others have had their minds shattered by the experience, by the terrible things they saw when they touched the essence of something that should not exist in our world. You are asking people to risk everything for a man they do not know, because you love him. Then I will pay whatever price they ask, I said. Money, favors, knowledge, anything. I will not let him be consumed by that thing. Lavinia reached across the desk and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I believe you, Eleanor, and I will help you. Not for payment, but because I have made too many mistakes in my own life, let too many people slip away because I was afraid or uncertain. I will not stand by and watch you lose someone the way I have lost people. But you must promise me something in return. Anything, I said. Promise me that if we attempt the banishment and it becomes clear that we cannot succeed without destroying both the Hollow One and James's body, you will let him go. Promise me that you will not sacrifice yourself or the other mediums in a futile attempt to save someone who is already lost. There are some battles that cannot be won, Eleanor, and recognizing defeat is not the same as giving up. It is simply acknowledging reality. I wanted to refuse, to tell her that I would never give up on James no matter how hopeless the situation became. But I saw the hard-won wisdom in her eyes, understood that she was asking me to accept the possibility that love, no matter how fierce, could not always triumph over the darkness. I promise, I said finally, the words tasting like ash. "If there is no hope, I will let him go." She squeezed my hand once, then released it. "Good. Now we have work to do. First, I need to teach you how to shield your mind from the creature's invasions. The bond you created makes you vulnerable, but it also gives you an advantage. You can reach into the space where it has imprisoned James, can speak to him, can remind him of who he is. If we can strengthen his consciousness, make him fight back from within, it will weaken the Hollow One's hold on his body. But you cannot do this without proper defenses, or it will sense your presence and attack you through the bond." She spent the next several hours teaching me techniques I had never encountered in all my years as a medium. She showed me how to build walls around my thoughts, how to create chambers within my own mind where I could retreat if attacked, how to recognize the signs of spiritual invasion before it was too late to defend myself. It was exhausting work, requiring a level of concentration and control I had not known I possessed. But by the time afternoon light was fading from the windows, I could feel the difference. My mind felt stronger, more organized, less vulnerable to outside intrusion. That evening, Lavinia took me to meet the first of the mediums she thought might help us. Her name was Catherine Marsh, and she lived in a modest house in Clerkenwell with her sister and her sister's 3 children. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair and shrewd green eyes that assessed me carefully as Lavinia made introductions. We sat in her cramped front parlor while the children played upstairs, their footsteps a constant thunder above our heads. Catherine listened without interrupting as I explained what had happened to James, what the Hollow One wanted from me, why I needed help to save him. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me with an expression I could not read. "I have encountered the Hollow Ones twice before," she said finally. "The first time, I was young and foolish and did not recognize what I was facing until it was nearly too late. I barely escaped with my soul intact. The second time, I was better prepared, but the person who had been possessed did not survive the banishment. The creature fought back with such violence that it killed its host rather than relinquish control. I have lived with that death on my conscience for 5 years, Miss Hartwell. I am not eager to add another. I understand the risks," I said. "But if we do nothing, James will be lost anyway. At least this way, he has a chance." "And what is he to you?" Catherine asked. "This Dr. Ashford. Is he a client? A friend? Something more?" I hesitated, aware that Lavinia was watching me, that my answer mattered. "He is the man I love," I said quietly. "He is the person who saw me, truly saw me, and did not turn away. He questioned everything about the spirit world and about me, but he never stopped trying to understand. He never stopped believing that there was something worth knowing beneath the mystery. And now he is trapped inside his own body, dreaming dreams that are not his own, while something monstrous wears his face and walks through his life. If I do nothing, if I let fear stop me from fighting for him, then I am not worthy of the love he gave me." Catherine was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then she nodded slowly. "I will help you, Miss Hartwell. Not because I think we will succeed, but because I understand what it means to love someone enough to fight impossible odds. I lost my husband to consumption 3 years ago. He suffered for months, wasting away before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to save him. At least you have a chance to act, to fight back. That is worth something, even if we fail." "Thank you," I said, and felt some of the weight on my chest ease slightly. "Thank you." Over the next 2 days, Lavinia and Catherine introduced me to 2 more mediums willing to join our cause. The first was a man named Thomas Wright, elderly and dignified, who had been studying the occult for longer than I had been alive. He agreed to help partly out of intellectual curiosity and partly because he believed that the Hollow Ones represented a threat to all mediums if left unchecked. The second was a young woman named Sarah Chen, the daughter of a Chinese merchant and an English mother, who possessed a rare gift for seeing spirits in their true forms, rather than the shapes they chose to present. She would be essential in making certain that we had truly expelled the Hollow One, and not simply driven it deeper into James's consciousness. With our circle assembled, we began to plan the banishment ritual. It would need to take place somewhere we could control, somewhere the Hollow One could be contained if things went wrong. Lavinia suggested her townhouse, specifically the sealed room she kept for dangerous workings, a space reinforced with iron and salt and protective symbols accumulated over decades of practice. But first, I would need to bring James there, would need to convince the creature wearing him to come to a location where we would have every advantage. That meant offering it something it wanted, something valuable enough to overcome its natural caution. It meant offering myself. I wrote a letter in my neatest hand, addressed to Dr. James Ashford at his lodgings, knowing the Hollow One would receive it. In the letter, I told it that I had reconsidered its offer, that I was willing to help it stabilize its hold on James's body in exchange for an agreement that it would release him eventually. I suggested we meet to discuss the terms of this arrangement, and I provided Lavinia's address and a time 2 evenings hence. It was bait, obvious and transparent, and I did not expect the creature to be foolish enough to accept it at face value. But I was counting on its arrogance, its belief that it was stronger and more clever than a group of human mediums. I was counting on its desire to secure my cooperation being greater than its caution. And most of all, I was counting on the fact that it would want to confront me, to demonstrate its power, to make me understand that I had no choice but to submit. The response came the next day, delivered by a messenger boy who said a gentleman had paid him $1 to bring it to my door. The note was written in James's precise handwriting, and it agreed to the meeting with a tone of barely concealed amusement. The creature thought it was walking into a negotiation. It did not realize it was walking into a trap. On the evening of the planned confrontation, I dressed in my simplest black dress and arrived at Lavinia's townhouse 2 hours early. The others were already there, preparing the sealed room according to the ancient rituals Lavinia had taught us. We drew circles in salt and iron filings, hung bundles of dried herbs that were said to weaken spirits, placed candles at the cardinal points, and lit them with prayers I had learned phonetically without fully understanding their meaning. In the center of the room, we placed a chair, and around the chair we drew a smaller circle, this one made of pure silver powder that Lavinia said would act as a cage for the Hollow One once we forced it from James's body. The plan was to weaken the creature's hold by surrounding it with multiple mediums, all focusing their will on separation. Then to use the bond I had created to call James's consciousness back to his body while simultaneously pushing the invader out. If we succeeded, the Hollow One would find itself trapped in the silver circle, unable to escape or find another host, and we could then banish it back, beyond the veil permanently. If we failed, well, I tried not to think about the many ways we might fail. As the appointed hour approached, we took our positions around the circle. Lavinia stood at the north point, Thomas at the south, Catherine at the east, and Sarah at the west. I stood outside the main circle, closest to the door, because I would need to be the one to bring James into the room and get him seated in the chair before the others closed the circle around him. We waited in tense silence, the candles flickering in the still air, shadows dancing on the walls. I felt the bond between James and me like a thread pulled taut, felt his presence somewhere in the city growing closer. The Hollow One was coming, wearing him like a suit of clothes, unaware that it was walking into its own destruction. Or so I hoped. The knock came precisely at 9 o'clock, 3 sharp raps on the front door. Lavinia's butler, who had been warned what to expect, showed the visitor upstairs and then left the house entirely as instructed. We could not risk any innocent bystanders being caught in what was about to happen. James appeared in the doorway of the sealed room, and I felt my heart twist at the sight of him. He looked tired, his face thinner than I remembered, his eyes shadowed with something that might have been illness, or might have been the strain of housing 2 consciousnesses in one body. But he smiled when he saw me, that familiar warm smile, and for a moment I almost doubted myself, almost believed that perhaps I had been wrong, that this was truly James and not some creature wearing him. Then he stepped into the room, and I felt the cold that radiated from him, felt the wrongness that no smile could disguise, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying that subtle layered quality that betrayed the presence beneath. "I am pleased you have seen reason. Shall we discuss the terms of our arrangement?" I moved aside, gesturing to the chair in the center of the room. "Please sit. We have much to talk about." He walked toward the chair without hesitation, without suspicion, his attention focused entirely on me. He did not notice the others standing silent at their positions, did not see the circles drawn on the floor, did not recognize the trap until it was too late. The moment he sat down, Lavinia spoke a word in a language I did not recognize, and the room blazed with sudden light. The candles flared, the circle around the chair ignited with silver fire, and the four mediums began to chant in unison, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to shake the very air. The creature realized its mistake and tried to rise, but the circle held it. It could not step beyond the boundary of silver fire, could not leave the chair without crossing a barrier that would burn its essence like acid. It threw back its head and howled with rage, and the sound that came from James's throat was not human. The walls trembled, the candles guttered. I felt the bond between us strain as the creature tried to use it to attack me, to invade my mind and force me to break the circle. But Lavinia had taught me well. I had built walls around my thoughts, had created defenses the creature could not easily penetrate. Instead of attacking back, I did something it did not expect. I reached through the bond, not toward the creature, but past it, down into the depths where it had imprisoned James's true consciousness. And I called to him. "James," I said, not with my voice, but with my mind, with my heart, with everything I was. "James, I know you can hear me. I know you are still there. Come back. Fight for yourself. Remember who you are." For a moment, there was nothing but resistance. Layers of darkness and confusion the Hollow One had wrapped around James's mind to keep him subdued. Then, like a light flickering in a distant window, I felt a response. "Eleanor," a thought came back to me, faint and uncertain. "Is that you? Where am I? What has happened?" "You have been taken," I told him, pouring all my love and desperation into the words. "Something has stolen your body and trapped you in dreams. But I am here. I have come for you. I need you to fight, James. I need you to push back against the thing that has imprisoned you. Can you do that for me?" I felt him gathering strength, felt his consciousness beginning to solidify and resist the creature's control. The Hollow One sensed it too, and redoubled its efforts to keep him subdued, to maintain its grip on his flesh. The medium's chanting grew louder, more insistent. The silver circle blazed brighter. I held on to the bond between James and me like a lifeline, refusing to let go even as the creature tried to sever it, tried to push me out, tried to destroy the connection that was its undoing. And slowly, painfully, I felt the balance beginning to shift. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes. Time became strange in that sealed room, elastic and unreliable, measured not by the ticking of clocks, but by the rising and falling of the medium's chants, by the pulsing of the silver circle, by the desperate struggle between two consciousnesses fighting for control of a single body. I held on to the bond between James and me with everything I had, feeling it strain and fray under the assault of the Hollow One's fury. The creature was powerful, far more powerful than I had anticipated, and it did not intend to relinquish its prize without destroying everything in its path. Through the bond, I could feel James fighting his way up through layers of imposed dreams and false memories, could sense him clawing toward consciousness like a drowning man swimming toward distant light. But the creature had wrapped itself so thoroughly around his mind that separating them was like trying to pull apart threads that had been woven together for weeks. Every time James gained ground, the Hollow One would push him back, would flood his consciousness with confusion and fear, would whisper lies about how he had chosen this, how he wanted to stay in the peaceful dreams rather than face the harsh reality of existence. And every time I would reach through the bond and remind him of the truth, would show him memories of us together, would speak his name like an incantation that could cut through the creature's deceptions. The mediums were tiring. I could see the strain on Lavinia's face, the sweat on Catherine's brow, the way Thomas's hands trembled as he maintained his position at the south point. Sarah's eyes had taken on a distant, glassy quality that suggested she was seeing things the rest of us could not, horrors that existed in the space between worlds. We needed to finish this soon, or we would all be lost. The Hollow One knew it too. It could feel our strength waning, could sense that time was on its side. All it had to do was wait us out, and we would collapse from exhaustion, and it would win by default. Unless I gave James a reason to fight harder than he had ever fought for anything. I closed my eyes and stopped trying to pull him toward consciousness. Instead, I dove deeper into the bond, plunging past the creature's defenses and the layers of dreams until I found the core of James's being, the essential self that remained untouched by the Hollow One's invasion. And I showed him everything. I showed him the moment I fell in love with him during our 5th meeting, when he had been questioning me about the nature of spirit communication and had become so animated that he knocked over his tea and then laughed at his own clumsiness with such genuine delight that I realized I had never met anyone who could be simultaneously so serious and so joyful. I showed him the night we first kissed, the real memory, not the false version the creature had tried to reproduce, and I let him feel the wonder and terror and hope that had flooded through me when I realized that this brilliant, skeptical man somehow loved me despite everything that should have kept us apart. I showed him every secret moment we had shared, every whispered conversation in darkened rooms, every touch that spoke of trust and desire and the fragile courage it took to love someone when the world said, "You should not." I showed him how his disappearance had devastated me, how I had searched for him with desperate determination, how I had bound my own soul to his because I could not bear to lose him. And then I showed him what would happen if he gave up, if he let the Hollow One win. I showed him the creature walking through his life, seeing his patients with his hands, speaking to his colleagues with his voice, existing in the world as Dr. James Ashford while the real James faded into nothing. I showed him how it would eventually consume every memory, every feeling, every piece of who he was until nothing remained but the hollow shell of a man who had once existed. "I cannot do this without you," I told him, my own consciousness wrapped around his like arms holding him close. "I can fight from outside, but only you can fight from within. Only you can reclaim what belongs to you. Please, James, please come back to me." For a moment, there was stillness, as if the entire universe were holding its breath. Then I felt James's consciousness surge upward with a force that took both the Hollow One and me by surprise. He was not just fighting back anymore. He was attacking, tearing at the creature's hold on his body with the fury of a man who had been imprisoned and had finally remembered his own strength. The thing in the chair screamed, and this time the sound was definitely not human. It writhed and convulsed, James's body contorting in ways that made me fear it would tear itself apart. The silver circle blazed so bright I had to shield my eyes, and the medium's chants rose to a fever pitch that seemed to shake the foundations of the house. I felt the exact moment when the balance tipped. I felt James's consciousness seize control of his own body, felt him push the Hollow One out, not gently, but with violent expulsion, like a body rejecting poison. The creature's essence was torn from James's flesh and trapped in the silver circle, visible now as a dark, writhing shadow that had no fixed form, that seemed to be made of smoke and malice and ancient hunger. It shrieked and raged, throwing itself against the boundaries of the circle, but the silver held. Lavinia raised her hands and began the final banishment, speaking words that resonated with power accumulated over centuries of use, words that opened a doorway back beyond the veil and commanded the Hollow One to return to the space where it belonged. The creature fought until the very end, screaming threats and curses, promising that it would return, that it would hunt us all, that we had made an enemy that would pursue us across lifetimes. But the banishment was stronger than its threats, and slowly, inexorably, it was pulled back through the doorway Lavinia had opened, back into the darkness beyond the veil. When the final word of the banishment was spoken, the creature vanished with a sound like breaking glass, and the doorway sealed behind it. The silver circle guttered and went dark. The candles dimmed to normal flames, and in the chair at the center of the room, James collapsed forward, his body suddenly boneless and slack. I ran to him before anyone could stop me, fell to my knees beside the chair and caught him as he toppled sideways. His skin was cold and clammy, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were his own eyes again, clear and confused and absolutely unmistakably alive. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken, "you came for me." I held him as tightly as I dared, feeling tears stream down my face, not caring who saw or what they thought. "Of course I came for you," I said. "Did you really think I would abandon you to that thing?" He tried to smile, but the effort seemed to exhaust him. "I do not remember much. Dreams that felt real, and then your voice calling me back. I remember fighting, but I do not remember why. What happened to me, Eleanor? Where have I been?" The others were gathering around us now, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but lit with the satisfaction of a battle won. Lavinia knelt beside me and placed her hand on James's forehead, her expression professional and assessing. "He will need time to recover," she said. "The Hollow One was inside him for weeks, feeding on his energy and his memories. He will be weak for some time, and he may have gaps in his recollection or moments of confusion as his mind repairs itself. But he will live, Eleanor. You saved him." I looked at James, at his dear familiar face, and felt something break open inside me, a dam of fear and desperation finally giving way to relief so profound it was almost painful. "We saved him," I corrected. "I could not have done it alone." Over the following days, as James slowly recovered his strength in a guest room at Lavinia's townhouse, I learned the true cost of what we had done. Catherine developed a tremor in her hands that she said might never fully disappear, a side effect of holding the circle against such powerful resistance. Thomas lost his hearing in one ear, the price he paid for channeling forces that were never meant to touch human consciousness. Sarah refused to speak of what she had seen during the banishment, but her eyes had a haunted quality that suggested the memories would stay with her for the rest of her life. And as for me, the bond I had created between James and myself did not fade when the Hollow One was expelled. Lavinia told me it never would, that I had tied our souls together in a way that transcended any normal human connection. I would always be able to sense him, would always know if he was in danger or distress, would always carry a piece of him inside my own spirit. It should have frightened me, that permanent connection, that loss of the clear boundary between self and other. But instead, I found it comforting. After nearly losing him to something that wanted to erase his very existence, the knowledge that I would always be able to find him felt like a gift rather than a burden. When James was finally strong enough to sit up and have coherent conversations, I told him everything. I told him about the Hollow One and how it had taken him, about my desperate search for help, about the binding I had created and the ritual we had performed to free him. I told him about the price the others had paid, about the sacrifices made by people he had never met because I had asked them to risk everything for a stranger. He listened without interrupting, his hand holding mine with a grip that never wavered. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant and thoughtful. "I remember some of it now," he said finally. "Being trapped in dreams that felt real but were not quite right, like a play where all the actors knew their lines, but none of them understood their characters. And I remember hearing your voice, feeling you calling to me from somewhere far away. At first, I thought you were just another part of the dream, but then I felt something else, something warm and true, and I knew you were real. I knew you were fighting for me. That knowledge was the only thing that kept me sane in that place. I felt tears threaten again and forced them back. I could not leave you there, I said simply. I love you too much to let anything take you from me, even death, even something worse than death. He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, a gesture so tender it made my heart ache. I love you too, Eleanor, and I owe you a debt I can never repay. You risked your life, your soul, for me. You asked strangers to do the same. I do not know how to begin to thank you for that. You do not need to thank me, I said. You would have done the same for me. Yes, he agreed. I would have, though I do not know if I would have had the courage to do it as effectively as you did. You were magnificent, Eleanor. Terrifying and brilliant and utterly magnificent. I felt myself blush, unused to such direct praise from him. We had always been so careful with each other, so aware of the boundaries imposed by society and circumstance. But something had changed during his captivity, during my fight to reclaim him. We had been bound together in a way that made pretense impossible, that stripped away all the careful protections we had built around our hearts. When James was well enough to leave Lavinia's townhouse, he did not return to his own lodgings. Instead, he came home with me, and I realized that I no longer cared what Mrs. Brennan or the neighbors or anyone else thought about the propriety of our arrangement. I had walked through fire for this man, had tied my soul to his, had risked everything to bring him back from a fate worse than death. I was not going to hide what we meant to each other any longer. Mrs. Brennan, bless her practical heart, asked no questions. She simply prepared a second room for Dr. Ashford and made it clear through small gestures that she approved of having a physician in residence, especially one who looked at her tenant with such obvious devotion. The police came to question James about his disappearance, and he told them a version of the truth that omitted any mention of Hollow Ones or spirit possession. He said he had been attacked and robbed on his way home from Lady Pemberton's séance, that he had suffered a head injury that resulted in amnesia, that he had wandered London in a confused state until his memory finally returned. It was not a perfect explanation, and I could see the skepticism in Inspector Davies's eyes. But without evidence of foul play or any crime to investigate, they eventually closed the case and moved on to other matters. James's family was less easily satisfied. His mother came down from Yorkshire and subjected both of us to intense scrutiny, clearly convinced that I had somehow led her son into danger through my spiritualist activities. She was not entirely wrong, though the truth was far stranger than she imagined. But James stood firm in his defense of me, made it clear that he had chosen to attend my circles of his own free will, that what had happened to him was not my fault, and that he had no intention of ending our association regardless of what his family thought about it. Eventually, his mother returned to Yorkshire, her disapproval still evident, but her acceptance grudging. I knew I would never be the daughter-in-law she had hoped for, the respectable woman from a good family who would give her physician's son the comfortable conventional life she had always imagined for him. But I also knew that James had never wanted that life, that he had been drawn to me precisely because I represented something different, something that challenged his assumptions and expanded his understanding of what was possible. In the weeks following his recovery, we settled into a new rhythm of existence. James returned to his medical practice, though he worked shorter hours and took more time for rest than he had before his captivity. I continued my work as a medium, but I was more careful now, more aware of the dangers that lurked beyond the veil. I strengthened my protections, learned more advanced techniques from Lavinia, and made certain that I never opened a doorway without being absolutely prepared for what might come through. And in the evenings, James and I would sit together in my rooms, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in comfortable silence, bound together by the invisible thread that connected our souls. He never fully regained all his memories of the time he spent imprisoned by the Hollow One, and there were still moments when he would become distant or confused, echoes of the trauma he had endured. But slowly, steadily, he healed, and I healed alongside him. 6 months after the banishment, on a spring evening when the air was soft with the promise of warmth and new growth, James took my hand as we sat together and asked me to marry him. It was not a surprise exactly, given how thoroughly our lives had become entwined, but hearing the words still made my breath catch. "I cannot offer you a conventional marriage," he said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "My family will never fully accept you, and society will always look at us askance because of your work. We will face judgment and gossip, and people who think that a physician should not marry a woman who speaks to the dead. But Eleanor, I do not want a conventional life. I want a life with you, with all the strangeness and difficulty and impossible wonder that comes with being bound to someone who exists with one foot in this world and one in the next. Will you have me, despite all the reasons you probably should not?" I looked at this man who had questioned everything about me and then loved me anyway, who had been stolen by something ancient and malevolent and had fought his way back because I called to him, who now sat before me offering everything he was with no reservations or conditions. And I knew that my answer had been decided long before he asked the question, perhaps as far back as that first séance when his sister came through, and I saw the wonder and grief and desperate hope in his eyes. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I will marry you, James Ashford, and I promise you that our life together will never be boring." He laughed, a sound of pure joy that chased away the last shadows of what we had endured, and pulled me into his arms. We kissed there in the lamplight, two people who had traveled through darkness and found each other on the other side, bound together by threads stronger than flesh or bone, connected in ways that would last beyond death and into whatever came after. We married quietly 3 months later, in a small ceremony attended by Lavinia, Catherine, Thomas, Sarah, and a handful of James's more open-minded colleagues. There were no grand celebrations or society announcements, no elaborate wedding breakfast or formal reception. It was simple and private and perfect, a recognition of something that already existed rather than the creation of something new. Lavinia gave us a gift at the wedding. A small iron amulet, she said, would protect us from any further interference from the Hollow Ones. She also gave us a warning, delivered with the gravity of someone who had seen too much to believe that happy endings were ever truly final. "You have made an enemy of something that does not forget," she told us as we prepared to leave for our wedding trip. "The creature you banished will remember you, Eleanor, and it will remember the man it nearly kept. The Hollow Ones are patient and they are vengeful. Be vigilant, be careful. And never, never open a doorway without being absolutely certain of what you are inviting through." I promised her we would be cautious, and I meant it. But as James and I left London for a month in the countryside, away from séances and spirits and the demands of our respective professions, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Hope that the worst was behind us. Hope that we had earned our happiness through suffering and sacrifice and the kind of love that refuses to surrender even when faced with impossible odds. Hope that the life we were building together would be strong enough to withstand whatever challenges came next, whether they came from this world or from the spaces beyond the veil. I knew that I would always be a medium, always sensitive to the whispers of the dead, always standing at the threshold between worlds. I knew that James would always be a man of science, always questioning, always seeking rational explanations even for the inexplicable. And I knew that our marriage would be a constant negotiation between faith and skepticism, between the known and the unknown, between the safety of certainty and the danger of mystery. But I also knew something else, something I felt with absolute conviction every time I looked at him or touched the bond that connected our souls. We had faced something terrible together and emerged not broken, but stronger. We had proven that love could be a weapon as well as a refuge, that two people bound together by choice and necessity could accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. And whatever came next, whether it was the ordinary challenges of life or something darker that waited beyond the veil, we would face it together. Years later, when people would ask me about the séance where my lover vanished and then returned to accuse me, when they would press for details about what really happened during those 3 weeks he was missing, I would tell them a version of the truth that omitted the most impossible parts. I would say that he had been attacked and injured, that he had recovered, that we had found each other again against considerable odds. But in my private moments, in the quiet hours when James slept beside me and I could feel his presence through the bond we shared, I would remember the truth in all its strange and terrible glory. I would remember the hollow one wearing his face, the desperate fight to reclaim him, the moment when his consciousness surged back into his own body and I knew we had won. I would remember standing at the edge of losing everything and choosing to fight instead of surrender. And I would be grateful, profoundly and permanently grateful, that I had been given not just a second chance at love, but a love strong enough to survive forces that should have destroyed it. A love that had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but triumphant. A love that proved, beyond any doubt or skepticism, that some bonds cannot be broken by death or distance or anything that exists in the spaces between worlds. That was the real miracle, I came to understand. Not that spirits could speak, or that mediums could hear them, or that things existed beyond the veil that defied scientific explanation. The real miracle was that two people could find each other in a world full of obstacles and impossibilities, could recognize something true and precious in each other, and could hold on to that recognition even when everything conspired to tear them apart. James and I built our life on that foundation, on the certainty that we had chosen each other and would continue choosing each other every day through whatever joys and sorrows the future held. And if sometimes I woke in the night feeling the cold presence of something watching from beyond the veil, if sometimes James would look at me with an expression that suggested he remembered more of his captivity than he admitted, we faced those moments together, armed with the knowledge that we had already survived the worst that the darkness could throw at us. We had won our happy ending not by avoiding danger but by walking through it hand in hand. And that made it sweeter than any conventional happiness could ever be, made it something we had earned rather than simply been given, made it a story worth remembering and retelling until the day when we would both cross the veil one final time and discover what waited on the other side. But that day was far in the future. For now, we had each other, and the bond that connected us, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that love, when fierce enough and brave enough and absolutely unwilling to surrender, could triumph over even the most impossible odds. And in a world full of mysteries and shadows and things that should not exist, that knowledge was enough.